Cheers, guys. Welcome back. And today we are going over chapter 6 in Maxwell Maltz's Psycho-Cybernetics. This chapter is called Relax and Let Your Success Mechanism Work for You. So without further ado, okay. Stress has recently become a popular word in our language. We speak of this as the age of stress. He was talking about back when he wrote this, which this book was written and published when exactly? May 1969. So it's been a few years since then. And I would say that we are in a state of perpetual, constant stress that is way further beyond. Then again, I wasn't alive at this time in 1969, but I would argue that the constant barrage of media, the advent of the internet, social media, all these things have only contributed to this chronic stress that affects all of us today. So keep that in mind as we read forward. Worry, anxiety, insomnia, stomach ulcers have become accepted as a necessary part of the world in which we live in. Including, now it's high blood pressure and obesity, diabetic, there's a ton of kids that are being prescribed medications today, more and more every single year, more and more kids that are, being diagnosed with autism and all kinds of things that was never an issue back when this book was written. So we find ourselves today in much more duress than people were at the time of this book, even. Like from a health standpoint, and a standpoint of stress and just what our bodies are going through on a day-to-day basis. The havoc being wreaked on our health. I could just go on and on about this topic, but I'm just going to leave it right there. Yeah. You can do plenty of your own research on this. Testosterone for males has been plummeting. Psychiatric SSRI medication, the suicide rates. It's all just coming to, I don't want to sound like a doomsday, doom and gloom type person here, but I just want to make a point that what he's talking about here has gotten way increased from the time that he's written this. So, yet I'm convinced that it does not have to be that way. We could relieve ourselves of a vast load of care, anxiety, and worry if we could but recognize the simple truth that our Creator made ample provisions for us to live successfully in this or any other age by providing us with a built-in creative mechanism. Our trouble is that we ignore the automatic creative mechanism and try to do everything to solve all our problems by conscious thought or forebrain thinking. The forebrain is comparable to the operator of an electronic brain or any other type of servo mechanism. It is with the forebrain that we think I and feel our sense of identity. It is with the forebrain that we exercise imagination or set goals. We use the forebrain to gather information, make our observations, evaluate incoming sense data, form judgments, but the forebrain cannot create. It cannot do the job to be done any more than the operator of an electric brain can do the work. It is the job of the forebrain to pose problems and to identify them. But by its very nature, it was never engineered to solve problems. Don't be too careful. Yet that is precisely what modern man tries to do, solve all his problems by conscious thought. Jesus told us that a man cannot add 1 cubit to his stature by taking thought. Today, Dr. Wiener tells us that man cannot even perform such a simple operation as picking up a cigarette from a table by conscious thought or will. Because modern man does depend entirely upon his forebrain and becomes too careful, too anxious, and too fearful of results, and the advice of Jesus to take no thought for the morrow, or St. Paul to be careful in nothing, is regarded as impractical nonsense. Yet, this is precisely the advice that William James, Dean of American Psychologists, gave us years ago, if we would but have listened to him. In his little essay, The Gospel of Relaxation, he said that modern man was too tense, too concerned for results, too anxious. This was in 1899, and that there was a better and easier way. If we wish our trains of ideation and volition to be copious and varied and effective, we must form the habit of freeing them from the inhibitive influence of reflection upon them, of egoistic preoccupation about the results. Such a habit, like other habits, can be formed. Prudence and duty and self-regard, emotions of ambition and emotions of anxiety have, of course, a needful part to play in our lives, but confine them as far as possible to the occasions when you are making general resolutions and deciding on your plans of campaign, and keep them out of the details. When once a decision is reached and the execution is order of the day, dismiss absolutely all responsibility and care about the outcome. Unclamp, in a word, your intellectual and practical machinery and let it run free. And the service it will do to you will be twice as good. I have to admit here that this is probably my biggest weakness when it comes to these ideas is I tend to be very logical and rational. And so the last chapter that we went over was easy for me to grasp, and this chapter is going to be homework for me as well. So I just want to put that out there that I'm on this path with you guys, and reading this book is awesome, and I'm loving going back through this book and sharing it with you guys and breaking it down because it's reinvigorating me to take away all the lessons here. So, victory by surrender. Later in his famous Clifford lectures, James cited example after example of persons who had tried unsuccessfully for years to rid themselves of anxieties, worries, inferiorities, guilt feelings by making conscious efforts, only to find that success finally came when they gave up the struggle consciously and stopped trying to solve their problems by conscious thought. Under these circumstances, said James, the way to success, as vouched for by innumerable authentic personal narrations, is by surrender. Passivity, not activity. Relaxation, not intentness, should be now the rule. Give up the feeling of responsibility. Let go your hold. Resign the care of your destiny to higher powers. Be genuinely indifferent as to what becomes of it all. It is but giving your private convulsive self a rest and finding that a greater self is there. The results, slow or sudden or great or small, of combined optimism and expectancy, the regenerative phenomena which ensue on the abandonment of effort, remain firm facts of human nature. The secret of creative thinking and creative doing. Proof of the fact that we have been of what we have been saying is true can be seen in the experience of writers, inventors, and other creative workers. Invariably, they tell us that creative ideas are not consciously thought out by the forebrain thinking, but come automatically, spontaneously, and somewhat like a bolt out of the blue when the conscious mind has let go of the problem and is engaged in thinking of something else. And that's the power of hypnosis. That's the power of the robotic nature of affirmations, which we've talked about on this channel many times before, is because that conscious thinking mind that is just trying to latch onto something is occupied. So it allows your other subconscious mind, it allows this kind of more powerful mind to operate and be in that flow state that we see people in. He's talking about artists, inventors. We see it in athletics a lot, is where you can witness it, is because they're focused on the ball. They've got their eye on the ball and they allow the body to do what the body knows how to do. The Inner Game of Tennis is another great book that talks about these ideas, and Timothy Galloway talks about self one and self two in that book. And I've made other videos about that as well. But let's get back to this. These creative ideas do not come willy-nilly without some preliminary conscious thought about the problem. And that's the important part, is that is the conscious thought. But once we have implanted or impregnated the subconscious with that conscious thought, once we have exercised that yang, or we can also think of the masculine principle, the decisive thought, and implanted it there, then we allow it to take root. We allow it to take hold in the subconscious, for the subconscious to be impregnated by that thought. And we'll see here how he describes this. Neville has used that example a lot, that analogy of the impregnation of a thought into the subconscious. Another analogy is planting the seed. Once the seed has been planted, you don't want to keep digging it up, right? You don't want to keep prodding and poking at the soil because it's never going to be able to grow. You have to plant the seed and then water it, tend to it. But really, the sunlight and all these things, um, that's another great analogy. But let's get into how he describes it here. All the evidence points to the conclusion that in order to receive an inspiration or a hunch, the person must first of all be intensely interested in solving a particular problem or securing a particular answer. He must think about it consciously, gather all the information he can on the subject, consider all the possible courses of action, and above all, he must have a burning desire to solve the problem. But after he had defined the problem, seized in his imagination the desired end result, secured all the information and facts that he can, the additional struggling, fretting, and worrying over it do not help, but seem to hinder the solution. And that's exactly what we're talking about with this analogy of digging up the soil once you planted the seed. Fair, the famous French scientist, said that practically all his good ideas came to him when not actively engaged in work on a problem, and that most of the discoveries of his contemporaries were made when they were away from their work, so to speak. It is well known that when Thomas Edison was stymied by a problem, he would lie down and take a short nap. Yeah, he would actually use this process that I've described before, where he would sit oftentimes in his chair with metal balls in his hand over a metal bowl. And as he would doze off to sleep and drift off to sleep, the balls would make a sound and clank against that metal bowl, which would rise him away out of his sleep again, so that he would begin to be between this state of sleeping and waking, or in that state of akin to sleep that Neville talks about, in that theta alpha state. And that is where he would get a lot of these ideas from. Of course, if you really know, if you know, you know, but Thomas Edison's, a lot of his ideas weren't really even his. He took a lot of Nikola Tesla's ideas. Now, Nikola Tesla was intimately familiar with not only this, but he would really be in a dream state, and he would receive the ideas for his inventions, not only the ideas, but the exact dimensions, the exact blueprints, the exact, down to the exact centimeter and millimeter like measurements. He would receive them without even drawing them out. He would know the exact measurements to give his craftsmen to then build machines in the laboratory, which is insane. But he was also an avid learner and an avid seeker of knowledge and spiritual knowledge. Nikola Tesla was. And another thing that's interesting about this too is, like, I was recently having a conversation with Sam from the Soul's Playground, and she's talking about how when you put out your thoughts, it's like they exist as a wave. And we know from quantum physics that the wave unobserved is in wave potential form, right? But as soon as you observe it, or as soon as you measure that wave from the observer effect that we witness in the experiment, these particles, what is it called? The double slit experiment. As soon as it's observed or measured, then the wave collapses into a particle. And so that's another interesting way of thinking this from a quantum physics perspective, that when we observe, like he says, when you take your attention away, you focus on something else, and then that's like when the universe is able to work its magic, because it's all existing in this wave form of potentiality. Yeah, so Charles Darwin, telling how an intuitional, I didn't know that was a word. I thought it was intuitive, but telling how an intuitional flash came to him suddenly after months of conscious thinking had failed to give him the ideas he needed for the origin of species, wrote, "I can remember the very spot on the road, whilst in my carriage, when to my joy the solution occurred to me." Lennox Riley Lohr, former president of the National Broadcasting Company, once wrote an article telling how ideas which had helped him in business came to him. Ideas, I find, come most readily when you are doing something that keeps the mind alert without putting too much strain upon it. Shaving, driving a car, sawing a plank, or fishing or hunting, for instance, or engaging with some friend in stimulating conversation. Some of my best ideas came from information picked up casually and entirely unrelated to my work. C.G. Suits, the chief of research at General Electric, said that nearly all discoveries in research laboratories came as hunches during a period of relaxation following a period of intense thinking and fact gathering. Bertrand Russell said, I've found, for example, that if I have to write upon some rather difficult topic, the best plan is to think about it with very great intensity, the greatest intensity which I'm capable for a few hours or days, and at the end of that time give orders, so to speak, that the work is to proceed underground. After some months, I return consciously to the topic and find that the work has been done. Before I had discovered this technique, I used to spend the intervening months worrying because I was making no progress. I arrived at the solution none the sooner for this worry, and the intervening months were wasted, whereas now I can devote them to other pursuits. Very interesting. So oftentimes when we have this we feel like this creative block or something, listening to the words of Bertrand Russell here, it's kind of like we can just allow ourselves to focus on other things and have that kind of faith and knowing that the answer will come to us in the meantime. You are a creative worker. The mistake we make is assuming that this process of unconscious celebration is reserved for writers, inventors, and creative workers. We are all creative workers, whether we are housewives, working in the kitchen, school teachers, students, salesmen, or businessmen. We all have the same success mechanism within us, and it will work in solving personal problems, running a business, or selling goods just as it will in writing a story or inventing. Bertrand Russell recommended that the same method he used in his writing be employed by his readers in solving their mundane personal problems. Dr. J.B. Ryan of Duke University has said that he is inclined to think that what we call genius is a process, a natural way in which the human mind works to solve any problem, but that we mistakenly apply the term genius only when the process is used to write a book or paint a picture. I like that. The secret of natural behavior and skill. The success mechanism within you can work in the same way to produce creative doing as it does to produce creative ideas. Skill in any performance, whether it be in sports, playing the piano, conversation, selling merchandise, consists not only in painfully and consciously thinking out each action as it's performed, but in relaxing and letting the job do itself through you. Creative performance is spontaneous and natural, as opposed to self-conscious and studied. That's why, Neville Goddard talks about so much the feeling of naturalness, cultivating that feeling of naturalness, and that's what Maxwell Maltz is talking about here too. And it's analogous to the book I mentioned earlier, the inner game of tennis, Self 1 and Self 2. Creative performance is spontaneous as natural, as opposed to self-conscious and studied. The most skilled pianist in the world could never play a simple composition if he tried to consciously think it out, just which finger should strike which key while he was playing. He has given conscious thought to this matter previously while learning, and has practiced until his actions became automatic and habit-like. He was able to become a skilled performer only when he reached the point where he could cease conscious effort and turn the matter of playing over to the unconscious habit mechanism, which is a part of the success mechanism. Conscious efforts inhibits and jams so this section is called Don't Jam Your Creative Machinery. Conscious effort inhibits and jams the automatic creative mechanism. The reason some people are self-conscious and awkward in social situations is simply that they are too consciously concerned, too anxious to do the right thing. They are painfully conscious of every move they make. Every action is thought out. Every word is spoken to, calculated for its effect. We speak of such persons as inhibited, and rightly so, but it would be more true were we to say that the person is not inhibited, but that the person has inhibited his own creative mechanism. If these people could let go, stop trying, not care, and give no thought to the matter of their behavior, they would act creatively, spontaneously, and, quote, be themselves. 5 rules for freeing your creative machinery. 1. Do your worrying before you place your bet, not after the wheel starts turning. I'm indebted to a business executive whose weakness was roulette for the above expression, which worked like magic in helping him overcome worry and at the same time function more creatively and successfully. I happen to quote him the advice of William James mentioned earlier, to the effect that emotions of anxiety have their place in planning and deciding upon a course of action, but that when once a decision is reached, execution is the order of the day. Dismiss absolutely all responsibility and care about the outcome. Unclamp, in a word, your intellectual and practical machinery and let it run free. Several weeks later, he burst into my office as enthusiastic over his discovery as a schoolboy who's discovered his first love. It hit me all of a sudden, he said, during a visit to Las Vegas. I've been trying it and it works. What hit you and what works? The advice of William James. It didn't make too much of an impression when you told me, but when I was playing roulette, it came to me. I noticed any number of people appeared not to worry about placing their bets. Apparently, the odds meant nothing to them, but once the wheel started turning, they froze up and began to worry whether the number would come up or not. How silly, I thought. If they want to worry or be concerned or figure odds, the time to do it is before their decision is made to place a bet. There's something you can do about it then, by thinking about it. You can figure out the best odds possible or decide not to take the risk at all. But after the bets are placed and the wheel starts turning, you might as well relax and enjoy it. Thinking about it is not going to do one bit of good and is wasted energy. Yeah, and if you want to come at this from like a manifesting perspective too, it could be actually counterproductive. It could be that by focusing on that negative outcome, that you are energetically, the more that you fear that outcome, like what you resist persists. And so you are then on the frequency of that which you do not want to receive. Then I got to thinking that I myself had been doing the exact same thing in my business and in my personal life. I often made decisions or embarked upon courses of action without adequate preparation, without considering all the risks involved and the best possible alternative. But after I set the wheels in motion, so to speak, I continually worried over how it would come out, whether I'd done the right thing. I made a decision right then in that future I would do all my worrying, all my brain thinking before a decision was made, and that after making a decision, I would dismiss absolutely all care or responsibility about the outcome. Believe it or not, it works. I not only feel better, sleep better, and work better, but my business is running much smoother. I also discovered that the same principle works in 100 different personal ways. For example, I used to worry about and fume about having to go to the dentist and other unpleasant tasks. Then I said to myself, this is silly. You know the unpleasantness involved before you make the decision to go. If the unpleasantness is all that important to cause so much concern and not worth the worry involved, you can simply decide not to go. But if the decision is that the trip is worth a little unpleasantness and a definite decision is made to go, then forget about it. Consider the risk before the wheels start turning. I used to worry the night before I had to make a speech at a board meeting. Then I said to myself, I'm either going to make the speech or I'm not. If the decision is to make it, then there's no need in considering not making it or trying to mentally run away from it. I have discovered that much nervousness and anxiety is caused by mentally trying to escape or run away from something that you have decided to go through with physically. If the decision is made to go through with it, not to run away physically, why mentally keep considering or hoping for escape? I used to detest social gatherings and go along only to please my wife or for business reasons. I went, but I mentally resisted it. I was usually pretty grumpy and uncommunicative, and then I decided that if the decision was to go along physically, I might as well go along mentally and dismiss all thought of resistance. Last night, I would not only went to what I would formerly have called a stupid social gathering, but I was surprised to find myself thoroughly enjoying it. 2. Form the habit of consciously responding to the present moment. Consciously practice the practice of taking no anxious thought for tomorrow by giving all your attention to the present moment. Your creative mechanism cannot function or work tomorrow. It can only function in the present today. Make long-range plans for tomorrow, but don't try to live in tomorrow or in the past. Creative living means responding and reacting to environment spontaneously. Your creative mechanism can respond appropriately and successfully to present environment only if you have your full attention upon the present environment and give it information concerning what is happening now. Plan all you want for the future, prepare for it, but don't worry about how you will react tomorrow or even 5 minutes from now. Your creative mechanism will react appropriately in the now if you pay attention to what is happening now. It will be the same tomorrow. You cannot react successfully to what may happen, but to what is happening. This is an important part. This goes right along with the power of now, mentioned many times, Eckhart Tolle's book, as well as Vadim Seelan's teachings in terms of being present and waking up like a firefly in your reality, as he calls it in Tufte. Live in day-tight compartments. Dr. William Osler said that this simple habit, which could be formed like any other habit, was the sole secret of his happiness and success in life. Live life in day-tight compartments, he advised his students. Look neither forward nor backward beyond a 24-hour cycle. Live today as best you can. By living today, well, you do the most within your power to make tomorrow better. If you have not read his excellent little essay, A Way of Life, in which he describes the advantages of this habit, I urge you to do so. William James, commenting upon the same philosophy as a cardinal principle of both psychology and religion for curing worry, said of St. Catherine of Genoa, "It is said that she took cognizance of things only as they were presented to her in succession, moment by moment. To her holy soul, the divine moment was the present moment, and when the present moment was estimated in itself and in its relations, and when the duty that was involved in it was accomplished, it was permitted to pass away as if it had never been, and to give way to the faces and duties of the moment which came after." Alcoholics Anonymous uses the same principle when they say, "Don't try to stop drinking forever. Merely say, 'I will not drink today.'" Stop, look, and listen. Practice becoming more consciously aware of your present environment. What sights, sounds, odors are present in your environment right now that you are not conscious of? Consciously practice looking and listening, becoming alert to the feel of objects. How long since you have really felt the pavement beneath your feet as you walk? The American Indian and early pioneers had to be so alert to the sights and sounds and feels of their environment in order to survive. So does modern man, but for a different reason. Not because of physical dangers, but because of the dangers of nervous disorders, which come from confused thinking, from failure to live creatively and spontaneously, and to respond appropriately to environment. Yeah, we are so cut off from our natural instincts, especially in this modern world, even more now than ever, like I mentioned before, because we're like constantly glued to our phones and all of this. And this is really practicing mindfulness. That's what other teachers talk about, other spiritual teachers, that awareness, that presence of the moment awareness, which is really going to make you self-aware, make you wake up from the movie, wake up from the script, and become the observer, become the aware character, that you are consciously in control of this character that you're playing, instead of just being thrown about in this movie, just playing this role in the script. It's really, again, you can see how people act unconsciously when you observe other people, but you also begin to notice then that you do that same thing. And a lot of these teachings in Buddhism, all of these spiritual teachings, really, they're saying the same thing. And that's what's so cool about studying all of these different things, is that they're all saying these things in different ways. This is becoming more aware of what is happening now and attempting to respond only to what is happening now has almost magical results in relieving the jitters. The next time you feel yourself tensing up, becoming jittery and nervous, pull yourself up short and say, "What is there here and now that I should respond to, that I can do something about?" A great deal of nervousness is caused from unwittingly trying to do something that cannot be done here or now. You are geared for action or for doing which cannot take place. Keep constantly in mind that the job of your creative mechanism is to respond appropriately to present environment here and now. Many times, if we do not stop and think about this, we continue to react automatically to some past environment. We do not react to the present moment and to the present situation, but to some similar event of the past. This is so important right here. In short, we do not react to reality, but to a fiction. Full recognition of this and realization of what you're doing can frequently bring about an amazingly quick cure. This is what is spoken about in Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now, when he talks about the pain body. That when we get triggered by things, it's almost never about the thing happening right now. It is almost always about some past thing. And so therefore, it is reacting to some fiction, some fear of our imagination, some thing that reminds us of something from the past. And we're playing that out. We're allowing ourselves to be led along a script by doing that. So doing all of these things that he's mentioning here in this section is really how we pull our present moment awareness back into the presence and begin to understand, begin to observe the way that our reactions, begin to observe our habituated emotions and those triggering things that trigger us. That's also shadow work. That's part of the deal of doing introspection. That's part of the deal of learning what is the payoff too that I'm getting from having these emotional reactions. What is this story that I'm telling myself? Why am I reacting so strongly to this thing? And then we can really begin to understand. And once we understand and have that awareness of it, that's when we can begin to change it. Don't fight straw men out of the past. For example, a patient of mine became jittery and anxious in business meetings, theaters, church, or in any formal gathering. Groups of people were the common denominator. Without realizing it, he was attempting to react to some environment out of his past where groups of people were a significant factor. He remembered that when a child in elementary school, he had wet his pants, and a cruel teacher had called him up in front of the class and humiliated him. He reacted with feelings of humiliation and shame. Now, one factor in the situation, groups of people, was reacted to as if it were the entire past situation. When he was able to see that he was acting as if he were a 10-year-old schoolboy, as if every gathering was an elementary school class, and as if every group leader was the cruel school teacher, his anxiety disappeared. Other typical examples are the woman who responds to every man she meets as if he were some individual man out of her past, the man who reacts to every person in authority as if he were some individual authority of his past. 3. Try to do only one thing at a time. Another cause of confusion and the resulting feelings of nervousness, hurry, and anxiety is the absurd habit of trying to do many things at one time. This is so funny because you see this happening so often. The student studies and watches TV simultaneously. The businessman, instead of concentrating upon and only trying to do the one letter that he is presently dictating, is thinking in the back of his mind of all the things that he should accomplish today, or perhaps this week, and unconsciously trying to mentally accomplish them all at once. This habit is particularly insidious because it is seldom recognized for what it is. When we feel jittery or worried or anxious in thinking of the greater amount of work that lies before us, the jittery feelings are not caused by the work, but by our mental attitude, which is, I ought to be able to do this all at once. That is so true, man. I've been watching some older movies lately, and it's cool. It's cool the way that they used to speak. That is how they used to speak. I ought to be able to do this all at once, right? And nowadays we're like, no, I can do this all at once. The truth is that we can only really do one thing at a time. We think that we're able to do, and we think that we're even able to think more than one thing at once. But really what's happening is we're scattered, because then we're thinking one thing, then another, then another, then another, and we're completely scattering our focus and losing our ability to do any sort of deep, meaningful work and have any meaningful engagement with the work that we're doing. It's like we're operating at like less than, 10% or less than of our actual ability and capacity when we do that. We become nervous because we are trying to do the impossible and thereby making futility and frustration inevitable. The truth is we can only do one thing at a time. Yep. Realizing this, fully convincing ourselves of this simple and obvious truth, enables us to mentally stop trying to do the things that lie next and to concentrate all our awareness, all our responsiveness on this one thing we're doing now. When we work with this attitude, we are relaxed, we are free from the feelings of hurry and anxiety, and we're able to concentrate and think at our best. The lesson of the hourglass. Dr. James Gordon Gilkey preached a sermon in 1944, Gaining Emotional Poise, which was reprinted in Reader's Digest and became a classic almost overnight. He had found through many years of counseling that one of the main causes of breakdown, worry, and all sorts of other personal problems was this bad mental habit of feeling that you should be doing many things now. Looking at the hourglass on his desk, he had an inspiration. Just as only one grain of sand could pass through the hourglass, so could we only do one thing at a time. It is not the job, but the way we insist upon thinking of the job that causes the trouble. Most of us feel hurried and harried, said Dr. Gilkey, because we form a false mental picture of our duties, obligations, and responsibilities. There seem to be a dozen different things pressing in upon us at any given moment, a dozen different things to do, problems to solve, strains to endure. No matter how hurried, harried our existence may be, this mental picture is entirely false. Even on the busiest day of the crowded hours to come, one moment at a time, no matter how many problems, tasks, or strains we face, they always come to us in single file, which is the only way they can come. To get a true mental picture, he suggested visualizing an hourglass with many grades of sand dropping one by one. This mental picture will bring emotional poise, just as the false mental picture will bring emotional unrest. Another similar mental device which I've found to be helpful in my patients is telling them your success mechanism can help you do any job, perform any task, solve any problem. Think of yourself as feeding jobs and problems to your success mechanism as a scientist feeds a problem to an electronic brain. The hopper to your success mechanism can handle only one job at a time, just as an electronic brain cannot give the right answer if three different problems are mixed up and fed in at the same time. Neither can your own success mechanism. Ease off on the pressure. Stop trying to cram the machinery with more than one job at a time. 4, sleep on it. If you've been wrestling with a problem all day without making any apparent progress, try dismissing it from your mind, putting it off, and making a decision once you've had the chance to sleep on it. Remember that your creative mechanism works best when there's not too much interference from your conscious eye. In sleep, the creative mechanism has the ideal opportunity to work independently of conscious interference if you have previously started the wheels turning. Remember the fairy story about the shoemaker and the elves? The shoemaker found that if he cut out the leather and laid out the patterns before retiring, little elves came and actually put the shoes together for him while he was sleeping. Many creative workers have used similar techniques. Miss Thomas Edison said that each evening her husband would go over in his mind those things which he hoped to accomplish the next day. Sometimes he would make a list of the jobs he wanted to do and problems which he hoped to solve. So Sir Walter Scott is reported to have said to himself, whenever his ideas would not gel, never mind, I shall have it at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. I like that, man. That's an affirmation right there that, look, I will have the idea when I wake up at 7 o'clock tomorrow or whatever, at whatever point, right? V. Bekhterev said, it happened several times when I was concentrated in the evening on a subject which I had put into poetic shape, that in the morning I had only to make my pen and the words flowed, as it were, spontaneously. I had only to polish them later. Edison's well-known cat naps were far more than mere respites from fatigue. Joseph Rossman, in The Psychology of Invention, says when stumped by something, he would stretch out in his Menlo workshop and, half dozing, get an idea from his dream mind to help him around the difficulty. J.B. Priestley dreamed 3 essays, complete in every detail: The Berkshire Beast, The Strange Outfitter, and The Dream. Archbishop Temple of Canterbury has said, all decisive thinking goes on behind the scenes. I seldom know when it takes place, much of it certainly during the sleep. Henry Ward Beecher once preached every day for 18 months. His method, he kept a number of ideas hatching, and each night before retiring would select an incubating idea and stir it up by thinking intensely about it. The next morning it would have fitted itself together for a sermon. Kekule's discovery of the secret of the benzene molecule during sleep, Otto Loewy's Nobel Prize winning discovery that active chemicals are involved in the action of nerves. Robert Louis Stevenson's brownies, which he said gave him all his plot ideas while sleeping, are well known. Less well known is the fact that many businessmen use the same technique. For example, Henry Cobbs, who started his business in the early 1930s with a $10 bill and now operates a multi-million-dollar mail order business in North Miami, Florida, keeps a notebook by his bedside to jot down creative ideas immediately upon waking. Vic Pocker arrived in this country from Hungary with no money and unable to speak English. He got a job as a welder, went to night school to learn English, and saved his money. His savings were wiped out in the Depression, but in 1932 he started a small welding shop of his own, and today that business has grown into a profitable $1 million firm. I've discovered you have to make your own breaks, he said. Sometimes in my dreams I get ideas for looking problems and wake up all excited. Many times I've gotten out of bed at 2 a.m., gone down to the shop to see if an idea would work. 5. Relax while you work. Practice exercise. In Chapter 4, you learned how to induce physical and mental relaxation while resting. Continue with the daily practice and relaxation, and you will become more and more proficient. In the meantime, you can induce something of that relaxed feeling and the relaxed attitude while going about your daily activities. If you will form the habit of mentally remembering the nice relaxed feeling that you induced, stop occasionally during the day. It need only take a moment and remember in detail the sensations of relaxation. Remember how your arms felt, your legs, back, neck, face. Sometimes forming a mental picture of yourself lying in bed or sitting relaxed and limp in an easy chair helps to recall relaxed sensations. Mentally repeating to yourself several times, "I feel more and more relaxed," also helps. Practice remembering this faithfully several times each day. You'll be surprised at how much it reduces fatigue and how much better you're able to handle situations. For by relaxing and maintaining a relaxed attitude, you remove those excessive states of concern, tension, and anxiety, which interfere with the efficient operation of your creative mechanism. In time, your relaxed attitude will become a habit and you will no longer need to consciously practice it. And that is the end of the chapter. Again, with points to fill in at the end here. So, the next chapter is chapter 7. You can acquire the habit of happiness. We'll be going over that in the next video. In the meantime, it's really interesting, the success mechanism and the aspect that relaxation plays in the role of using what Maxwell Maltz calls the success mechanism. Again, all of these spiritual teachings, they talk about entering into that state of no mind, or that state, that's what Joe Dispenza calls it, that state where you're not focused on the outside world, which is a state of relaxation, letting go of those problems, those worries, those anxieties. And there's actually science being done on consciousness. There's this guy named Dan Winter who I've started watching some videos of. It's very complicated, the science he talks about, but essentially he talks about the source of creation is something that he calls negentropy. Negentropy, as you may know, is the process by which things decay and the process by which things tend to from order into chaos, right? Things begin to, over time, to unravel, to become disorganized, those types of things. It's like, the swamp that gathers fungus and, left unattended, the garden, it grows weeds and it becomes a mess, right? That is the state in which most things go through over time. But negentropy is the opposite. It's essentially like a white hole instead of a black hole. And he describes that source energy, in a scientific way. I don't know if this will make sense or not, because the way he describes it, like, you just have to watch his videos, but he says that it can only take place from a state of coherency, which is a state of relaxed attention. Another way to think about that. So when we see all these practices, when it comes to manifesting, or when it comes to focused attention and mindfulness and engaging with something, being present to the moment, all these things, they're all about focused attention, relaxed attention. And that is, it seems to be, from this perspective of science that he speaks about as well, the key ingredient, that neutrality as well, that not those flip-flopping, those emotional states, those volatile emotions, again, is not going to be conducive to creation. So very interesting. Just wanted to throw that tidbit in here. With that being said, guys, much love as always. Drop this video with a like, hit me with a subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video, in the next chapter.